Hello everyone and welcome back to the Let's Learn mini-series. Today we are coming back from the land of dry media to dive into... Wait, what is that I see? Oh my goodness, it is acrylics. I know I said I wasn't going to do this one, but I think I found a cheeky way to explain myself while still giving you guys some unique content. However, before we get started, I'd like to first thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video and making this mini-series possible. For those of you who don't already know about them, Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in art, design, business, and more. As you know, I've spent a lot of time on Skillshare for this series, researching each new medium thoroughly before recording each episode. In this case, I was looking for classes on acrylic painting and more specifically, painting with palette knives. But we'll talk more about that specific class that I followed a little bit later on in the video. Whether you want to fuel your curiosity, feed your creativity just for fun, or want to add new skills to your art career toolbox, learning on Skillshare with more than 7 million other creators can help you keep learning in 2019. A premium membership to the site costs less than $10 a month when billed annually and gives you unlimited access so that you can find any class or community that you are looking to fit your goals for the new year. If you'd like to try Skillshare for free, check out the link in the description below to get a 2-month free trial for my first 500 subscribers who used the link. Alrighty, so do you remember when I told you guys before that I didn't want to work with acrylics and that I really didn't enjoy them? Well, that's not entirely true. In fact, I actually have quite a long history with acrylics, but I'm guessing that the response that I gave you before must have been a knee-jerk reaction to the idea of painting a traditional 2D painting with them. You see, back in 2013, several years before I discovered my love for watercolors, my Etsy shop actually started off as a shop for selling these little clay animals. If you've been around my channel since the beginning, you might remember me talking a little bit about this as I started my side business to raise veterinary funds for my elderly horse at the time. I sculpted these little animals out of polymer clay and I hand painted each and every one of them using acrylics. And I loved watching them come to life. So I do love using acrylics, just not in the traditional way that people would expect them to be used. The majority of my acrylic paint collection is in the form of these little craft bottles that you can buy for less than $2 each at Michael's or your local craft supply store. I'd use the inside of the cap as my palette and had other small containers that I'd mix custom colors in. However, due to painting over the caps time and time again and finishing off my last clay critter over 2 years ago, I had a bit of work cut out for me before I could start filming in this video so that I could actually get to the acrylic paint. Or so I thought, but I'll get to that later. Luckily, I suppose, the binder in acrylic paint, as many of you might already know, is made from polymer, which is a type of plastic. So when it's up against another type of plastic, the paint can actually peel off once you can get your finger underneath the edge of it. Now, my grand idea for this series was to paint a peach in every medium to compare them all at the end of the series. I know I could still technically do that here, but I thought it would be much more interesting today to show you how I used to use acrylics. This was such a blast from the past, as I mentioned, I haven't made one of these little dudes since late 2016. Both the sculpting and the painting took a little bit of thinking through, but it was pretty much like riding a bike in that it came back to me pretty easily. I didn't have any of the little empty paint cuppies thingies to mix a custom gray in, although that's what I used to do when I had this as a business. So instead today I just used a doubled over piece of wax paper as my palette and poured out a little bit of the warm white and lamp black to start mixing a base gray color that I would need for my little dapple gray horse. I apply a base coat kind of as a primer, and then I go over it with subsequent layers until I'm happy with the way that it looks. So as you guys can see, my acrylic brush collection is pretty much mangled. I know you're not supposed to get paint into the ferrule, but I do no matter how hard I try to avoid it. My brushes also follow this cycle of they'll start off as these nice flat or filbert type brushes, and over time they get frayed and they'll transition into being my stippling brushes, which I use to blend colors and create fur textures. But pretty soon all the brushes end up that way, and then I'm kind of wondering what to do when I can't find a flat one. Now, regarding acrylics, hypothetically, as a main medium over watercolors, I have a little bit of information that I just want to share about my style personally. I have a use for these mangled brushes in this very specific art form of painting these little clay animals, so I'm moderately okay with how long I can extend the life of my brushes in this setting. However, in a two-dimensional paint setting, I know I would still end up getting paint in my ferrule, and given how fast acrylics dry and how long I personally take to paint anything, because this tiny little horse took an hour and a half to paint, I know how many brushes I would ruin, and subsequently they would end up in the landfill, and I'm personally just not okay creating that much waste with my art supplies. By comparison, I think there's only ever been one watercolor brush that I just ruined beyond use with regular use, and the tip bent and I couldn't fix it. Other than that, all the brushes that I've ever purchased are either still in my possession or they have gone on to my patrons. This is a total personal account, and I know that there are plenty of other artists out there who can take better care of their brushes, but between my brush turnover, the dried paint that I'd have to throw away on a palette from drying too quickly, the liquid polymer paint that I have to wash down the sink when cleaning my brushes normally at the end of a painting session, I'm just never going to gel well with this medium, especially when watercolor is another option for me from an environmental standpoint. But anyway, that brings us to our medium, or rather application style, for today's piece and the Let's Learn portion of this video, where we're going to be creating an abstract painting using palette knives. Try and say that 5 times fast. I was really excited when I found this short and easily digestible class on Skillshare. It's a 13-minute class by Suzanne Kurilla, sorry if I'm saying that name wrong, and it uses palette knives and applies the paint directly to the canvases to create this really serene type of painting style that I thought I would have a similar therapeutic effect as I did with those pastels from last time. Also, given that we'd be applying the paint directly to the surface and using palette knives, I thought that there might be less waste involved. Before I could start painting, I had to prime some wood panels that I had lying around forever, one of those sale purchases at an art shop that I didn't need, but it was, in quotes, too good to pass up, and then promptly they just sat around for years, so I'm glad to finally have an excuse to use them. I applied one thin layer of Liquitex gesso and would have done another if I had time, but for this more casual painting style, I think it'll be okay. I had 2 little 4x4 panels and 1 larger 8x10 panel, and started with the little ones before jumping into the main event. In this class, she used craft paint, so that's where I started as well, using those craft tubes that I had from my critter days. I'm not sure if it was the lack of texture on the board versus she was using a canvas, but it wasn't a super enjoyable experience. The paint was really thin and it slid around too easily and never really seemed to grip the surface. I also used her color scheme, but found that my tiny canvas was nowhere near large enough to have the same movement as hers did. And even with a small palette knife, it looked really stiff and incomplete. I set this aside to dry, but later scraped off all the acrylic on it and smoothed it over and repainted it off camera, and I'll show you what that looked like at the end of this video. But first, my next experiment. On the second small panel, I decided to use some heavy-body Liquitex paints that I've had since maybe 2005 or 2006. I don't know, they're over a decade old, but still to my surprise, they were in perfect condition. Now, as you guys know from my previous adventures with gouache and oils, if I'm not painting in watercolors, I like my paint to be thick. I know it's 2 vast extremes of the spectrum, but the heart wants what it wants, so I went ahead and indulged it here with this thick-bodied paint. I was so much more satisfied with the way that the paint gripped the board and the texture that remained in the paint when applied with the palette knife. I found that I really enjoyed moving across the panel for most of the strokes and then using the vertical strokes along the corners and sporadically throughout the painting itself. And it wasn't in the Skillshare class, but I also found that if I loaded the edge of my palette knife and then set it down on the board, I could create these really nice crisp lines that contrasted nicely with the broader, flatter strokes of the painting. Since I like the consistency of this paint so much more, I decided to end up using it for the larger painting as well as redoing my first painting. So all of that work uncovering the inside of those craft paints was for naught, but oh well, they're ready to go if I want to bust them out another time. For the final piece, I ended up doing a painting using only titanium white and phthalo blue with no third accent color. I really liked the way that they worked together, and I wanted to focus on the strokes and the value more so than the color. As Suzanne mentions in our class, I try to be aware of the values throughout the painting and to take the overall composition into consideration, something that's quite difficult to do if you are working in abstracts for the very first time. I would ask myself questions like, why am I putting this color here? Why did I use this stroke over there? I really wanted to have a reason for putting them down on my board instead of just throwing them down and calling it a day, because it's easy to fall into the trap of saying, well, it's just an abstract, right? Who cares and who would know the difference? Well, I would. The goal of the majority of my artwork is to create a connection between the animal subjects and the human viewer to inspire passion, compassion, and a drive for conservation. So if I'm being honest, this abstract process did ultimately leave me feeling a little bit empty personally, and that then sparked a whole nother internal monologue about my own artwork and my own artistic potential. I actually really like how these paintings turned out visually. I think they're very pretty, and the business side of me is even going as far to thinking as, well, you can crank out these pieces much faster than you can fully conceptualize a detailed animal portrait, and to be honest, they're probably more universally appealing since more people like the color blue, for instance, than a Madagascar hissing cockroach like I did for my last AAC piece. So why not make just a bunch of these and sell them? Is it wrong to make less fulfilling artwork if it fuels other projects, or are you considered selling now if you do that? I don't know the answer to that question, but I'd love to start a very respectful discussion in the comments below, really stressing that word respectful here, about your thoughts on abstract art and its place in a commercial market. What types of artwork are you most likely to hang in your own home? Can an artist successfully straddle two vastly different artistic styles and artistic mediums while still holding onto the integrity of each? I don't know. It was just an interesting conversation that popped into my mind, and I'd love for you to let me know respectfully in the comments below and let me know what you think about the pieces that I created today. My shop is currently closed at the moment, but if you're interested in any of the little clay critters that I showed off earlier in this painting, I still have some of them hanging around since I transitioned my business back in 2016. You can let me know by messaging me over on Etsy, and I can set up a private listing for you when I get back from traveling in mid-February. They'll all be at a slightly discounted price from what I would have originally sold them at when that was my main business model, now landing them somewhere between like $20 and $40 depending on their complexity. As for right now, we are coming to the conclusion of this Let's Learn mini-series, as it was initially conceptualized to be only 4 episodes. However, there are still many more mediums that I'd like to explore, like charcoal and water-soluble graphite, and even new subjects like figure drawing and human portraits. So let me know if you do want to see more from this series in the future, maybe once a month or every other month, or do you just want me to get back to the regularly scheduled watercolor programming? Regardless, I am excited to keep creating and exploring no matter the medium, so I will see you in my next video. Thank you so much to my sponsor Skillshare, to all of my patrons for helping to support this channel every single day, and to all of you who are watching. Oh, and of course, thank you guys so much for helping me to reach 40,000 subscribers, which we hit last week. Y'all are amazing. I love you, and until next time, happy painting.